Welcome to Story Planet, where we bring you relaxing tales to help you unwind. Tonight's story is The Merchant's Journey. So settle in, get cozy, and let yourself be carried away into a world of peace, adventure, and timeless wonder. Now, let's begin. The Call to the Road. The streets of London were waking with life as the first light of dawn touched the city. It was the year 1350. Bells rang softly in the distance, marking the start of another day. Merchants called out their wares, their voices blending with the creak of carts on cobblestones. Horses snorted gently. Children darted through narrow alleys, their laughter bright against the hum of the morning. The air smelled of freshly baked bread mingled with the earthy scent of the Thames. Edmund Fletcher stood by his small shop. His hands brushed over bolts of fabric as he prepared for his journey. Silk from the east shimmered in the early light, a luxurious treasure in a modest corner of the city. Woolen cloth, simple yet sturdy, lay stacked neatly. But Edmund's mind wasn't on his wares. His eyes lingered on the well-worn road stretching northward. London to York, a path he had planned for weeks, full of promise and unknowns. The decision had not been easy. The evening before, Edmund's wife Matilda had spoken softly. "Are you sure this is wise?" she asked, her hands busy with needlework. "The roads can be dangerous. Bandits, storms, anything could happen." Edmund had smiled, his hand resting gently over hers. "My love, the best rewards often lie beyond the risks. We must trust the road." Her eyes had glistened with unspoken worry, but she had nodded, understanding that this was a part of the life they had built together. Now, as the city stirred around him, her words echoed gently in his mind. He tightened the straps on his cart, filled with treasures to trade, vibrant fabrics, small casks of fragrant spices, bundles of rare herbs. Each item was more than goods. It was a promise of connection to distant lands and eager hands. His hands lingered on the last package, an ornate silk bundle Matilda had tucked in with care, meant as a gift for a distant cousin. Rowan, his mule, stood calmly at his side. Her dark eyes followed his movements, steady and unhurried. Edmund rested a hand on her neck, feeling the warmth of her patience. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of leaves about to turn. A faint breeze whispered through the streets, carrying with it the soft murmurs of a waking city. Neighbors came to bid him farewell. "Safe travels, Master Fletcher," called Martha the baker, her hands still dusted with flour. "Bring back tales from the north." "And stories of York Minster," added young Thomas, his eyes full of wonder. Edmund nodded and smiled, his heart lifting with their well wishes. The familiar streets, lined with half-timbered houses and busy markets, faded as he took the first steps onto the open road. The first steps of the journey were quiet. The city's bustling sounds softened as the road stretched out before him. Trees lined the path, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Fields of golden wheat swayed like waves under the sun. Birds sang high in the sky, their melodies weaving through the air like threads of a larger song. Each step felt like shedding the weight of the familiar for the adventure ahead. As the hours passed, Edmund met others along the road. A farmer herding sheep nodded in silent greeting. Children, barefoot and laughing, ran alongside the cart before disappearing into the fields. An old woman carrying a basket of wildflowers offered a soft blessing as they crossed paths. Each moment felt like a piece of a tapestry, each meeting a thread woven into the fabric of his journey. By late afternoon, the sun began its slow descent. Its golden light stretched across the land, painting the world in hues of amber and rose. The air grew cooler, carrying the earthy scent of freshly tilled soil and the faint sweetness of distant apple orchards. Edmund found shelter beneath a great oak tree. Its branches spread wide, offering a canopy of quiet and rest. He unhitched Rowan and set a small fire, its crackling warmth breaking the stillness of the evening. Dinner was simple: bread, cheese, and a flask of ale. Edmund ate slowly, savoring each bite. Above him stars began to appear, one by one, like tiny lanterns lighting the vast sky. He thought of Matilda, her face framed by the glow of their hearth. He thought of his children, their laughter ringing in memory like the sweetest melody. His heart ached softly, but carried the quiet joy of knowing they waited for his return. The fire burned low as the night deepened. Wrapping his cloak around him, Edmund leaned against the oak's sturdy trunk. The rhythmic breath of rowan and the soft hoot of an owl were his only companions. His thoughts drifted, carried by the gentle sway of the flames. The road ahead was a mystery, filled with the unknown. Yet in this moment, there was peace. A light breeze stirred the leaves above, whispering promises of adventures yet to come. Edmund closed his eyes, letting the sound lull him into sleep. Tomorrow, the road would call again, its winding path stretching toward York. For now, under the stars and the sheltering oak, all was still. Through the forest of shadows. The morning light filtered through the branches of the great oak, casting dappled patterns on the ground where Edmund stirred. A faint chill still lingered in the air, the kind that clings to the edges of dawn. Rowan snorted softly as she grazed nearby, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. Edmund stretched and rose, brushing away the leaves that had settled on his cloak during the night. Today, the road would lead him deeper into England's countryside, and his heart was ready. The forest loomed ahead, its dense canopy creating a shadowy tunnel that seemed both inviting and mysterious. Known to travelers as the Forest of Shadows, it was said to stretch for miles, its winding paths often testing the patience and resolve of those who dared to enter. Stories of its beauty, as well as its dangers, were whispered in every inn along the road. Edmund guided Rowan carefully into the forest. The air here was different, cooler and heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. The songs of the birds seemed softer, as if they too respected the solemnity of the place. Shafts of sunlight broke through the canopy, illuminating patches of moss and wildflowers that painted the forest floor with soft colors. Each step of Rowan's hooves echoed faintly, the sound swallowed quickly by the dense stillness. As he traveled deeper, Edmund's thoughts turned inward. Memories of his childhood surfaced, days spent wandering the woods near his home, dreaming of far-off places. Those were simpler times, filled with the innocent wonder of a boy who believed the world had no boundaries. Now, as a merchant, he had learned the weight of responsibility, but that sense of wonder had never truly left him. The path ahead narrowed, winding between ancient trees whose gnarled branches twisted like old hands reaching toward the sky. A rustling sound caught Edmund's attention, and he paused, scanning the shadows. From the underbrush emerged a fox, its sleek coat catching a ray of sunlight. It stopped to regard him, its amber eyes curious and unafraid. Edmund smiled, feeling a strange kinship with the creature. Both travelers, both wary of what lay ahead. The fox disappeared as swiftly as it had appeared, leaving Edmund alone once more. He pressed on, the forest around him alive with subtle movements and faint sounds. A brook bubbled nearby, its cheerful gurgling a welcome companion to the quietude. Edmund stopped to refill his flask, kneeling by the water's edge and letting the coolness refresh his hands. Rowan drank deeply, her ears flicking at the distant calls of unseen birds. As the sun climbed higher, the forest began to thin, revealing glimmers of open sky ahead. But just as relief at leaving the shadows began to settle over Edmund, a voice called out from the trees. "Ho there, traveler." The voice was sharp, cutting through the stillness like a blade. Edmund froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the small knife tucked at his belt. From the shadows stepped a figure, cloaked and hooded, followed by two others. Their rough appearance and the glint of steel in their hands left no doubt. Bandits. Edmund's heart raced, but his voice remained steady. "I am but a humble merchant passing through. I have little of value, save for the goods in my cart." The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, sneered. "Little of value? We'll be the judge of that. Unhitch the mule and hand over the cart." Edmund's mind worked quickly. To lose the cart would mean the failure of his journey, but to resist outright might cost him his life. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we can reach an arrangement. I carry fabrics and spices, goods that could fetch you a fair price in the markets. Take a portion and leave me the rest." The bandits exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing. The leader stepped closer, inspecting the cart with greedy interest. Finally, he nodded. Very well, merchant. We'll take our share, but count yourself lucky we leave you anything at all. They took several bolts of cloth and a small cask of spices, leaving the rest untouched. As they disappeared back into the forest, Edmund felt a mixture of relief and anger. He had avoided disaster, but the loss was still a blow. Yet, as he hitched Rowan back to the cart and resumed his journey, he reminded himself that he was still alive. The road with all its trials stretched ahead, and he was determined to see it through. By the time Edmund emerged from the forest, the sun was beginning its descent. The open fields beyond felt like a balm after the close, shadowed confines of the trees. He found a small clearing to make camp, the sky above painted in soft hues of orange and lavender. As he settled in for the night, the events of the day played through his mind. The forest had tested him, but it had also reminded him of his resilience. Tomorrow, the journey would continue, and with it, the promise of new adventures. The market town of Amberley. The morning sun rose gently over the horizon, casting a soft golden light on the road ahead. Edmund's journey had brought him to the edges of a bustling market town known as Amberlea. It was said that travelers could find anything here, from fine silks to rare spices, from tools for trade to tales from distant lands. The sight of its timber-framed buildings, their roofs slanting toward the narrow cobbled streets, was a welcome change after the solitude of the forest. As he guided Rowan toward the town's gates, the sounds of life grew louder. Merchants called out to passers-by, advertising their wares in melodic voices. Children chased each other through the market stalls, their laughter carrying above the din. The scent of roasted meats and freshly baked bread wafted through the air, mingling with the sharper tang of tanned leather and dried herbs. At the gates, a guard nodded at Edmund. "Welcome to Amberley, traveler. Are you here for the market?" "Indeed," Edmund replied, offering a friendly smile. "I'm a merchant passing through on my way to York. I've heard much about your town." "You won't be disappointed," the guard said, stepping aside. "The market's lively today. Keep an eye on your goods, though. The crowds can attract wandering hands." Edmund thanked him and urged Rowan forward. The cart's wheels clattered over the uneven cobblestones, blending into the vibrant symphony of the marketplace. He found a quiet corner near a stone well and began setting up his stall. Unfurling bolts of fabric in rich colors and arranging small casks of spices, he took care to display his wares as invitingly as possible. It wasn't long before the first customers arrived. A young woman with a basket of eggs paused to admire the fine silk. "I've never seen fabric like this before," she said, her eyes wide with wonder. "It comes from far across the seas," Edmund explained, his voice calm and reassuring. "Silk this fine is rare in these parts. It would make a gown fit for a queen." The woman smiled, though she hesitated. "Perhaps one day. For now, I'll settle for looking." She thanked him and moved on, leaving Edmund to tend to the next curious visitor. As the morning turned to afternoon, business flourished. A miller's wife purchased a bolt of soft wool for winter cloaks. A traveling bard traded a pouch of coins for a small cask of cinnamon, promising to spread word of Edmund's wares in the next town. Each transaction brought not only profit, but also stories, snippets of lives that intersected briefly with his own. During a quiet moment, Edmund allowed himself to take in the scene around him. The marketplace was alive with color and movement. A juggler entertained a gathering crowd with bright scarves flying through the air. A blacksmith's hammer rang out in rhythmic strikes, shaping iron into tools and horseshoes. An elderly man played a soft tune on a flute, his music weaving through the chatter like a gentle breeze. A sudden commotion near the center of the square drew Edmund's attention. A small boy had tripped, spilling a basket of apples onto the cobblestones. Before Edmund could react, a burly merchant barked angrily at the child, his voice loud enough to still the surrounding chatter. "Watch where you're going, boy. You've bruised half my fruit." The boy stammered an apology, his face pale with fear. Edmund stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. Now, good sir, Accidents happen. Let me pay for the damage. The merchant frowned but seemed mollified when Edmund handed him a few coins. Fair enough, he grumbled, turning back to his stall. Edmund knelt to help the boy gather the scattered apples. Be more careful next time, he said gently, handing the basket back. And remember, kindness can be just as valuable as anything sold in this market. The boy nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you, sir. I won't forget. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the square, Edmund began packing up his stall. His day in Amberley had been fruitful, both in trade and in the connections he had made. He loaded the remaining goods onto Rowan's cart and took a moment to look back at the lively marketplace, now beginning to quiet as evening approached. Edmund found an inn just off the main square, its sign swinging gently in the evening breeze. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the comforting scent of stew and fresh bread. He took a seat by the fire, letting the day's weariness melt away. A serving girl brought him a bowl of hearty stew and a mug of ale, which he accepted with a grateful nod. As he ate, Edmund reflected on the day. Amberley had been a reminder of the joys of the road, not just the trade, but the people, the stories, and the moments of connection that made the journey worthwhile. Tomorrow, he would move on, the road to York still stretching ahead. But for tonight, in the warmth of the inn, surrounded by the quiet murmur of contented voices, Edmund felt at peace. The Traveler's Rest. The first light of dawn painted the sky in gentle hues of pink and gold as Edmund prepared to leave Amberley. The market town, now quiet in the early morning, seemed to hold its breath, as if reluctant to release him back to the road. Rowan stood patiently by the cart, her dark eyes reflecting the soft morning light. With his goods secured and a quiet farewell to the innkeeper, Edmund set out once more, the cobbled streets giving way to the dirt path that stretched ahead. The road was kinder now, winding gently through rolling hills dotted with wildflowers. The air carried the fresh scent of dew and earth, mingled with the faint sweetness of blossoms. As Rowan's hooves created a rhythmic clop against the path, Edmund felt a sense of calm wash over him. Amberley had been a success, and now he looked forward to the next stretch of his journey. By midday, the sun climbed higher, warming the earth and drawing out the vibrant colors of the countryside. The road widened near a crossroads where a weathered signpost pointed in several directions. Edmund paused to study it, deciding to take the route that led toward the Traveler's Rest, an inn known among merchants for its hospitality. The thought of good food and warm company quickened his pace. The inn came into view as the afternoon wore on, its stone walls softened by ivy and its windows glowing with the promise of welcome. A low wooden fence bordered a yard where chickens pecked lazily, and a stable boy waved as Edmund approached. The sign above the door swung gently in the breeze, bearing the name of the inn in faded, elegant lettering. A soft hum of activity greeted him as he stepped inside. Inside, the common room buzzed with quiet activity. A fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth wrapping around the space like a comforting embrace. Merchants, farmers, and travelers filled the tables, their voices weaving together in a tapestry of conversation. Edmund found a seat near the fire, his muscles relaxing as the innkeeper's daughter brought him a steaming bowl of stew and a fresh loaf of bread. "You look like you've traveled far," she said kindly, setting the meal before him. "Far enough," Edmund replied with a small smile. "And yet still farther to go." She nodded, her eyes bright with curiosity. "The road must carry many stories." "It does," Edmund agreed, breaking the bread and savoring its warmth, "and each one is a treasure in its own way." As he ate, Edmund's gaze wandered around the room. He noticed a group of merchants deep in discussion, their hands gesturing animatedly over a map spread across the table. An elderly woman sat near the window, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked. At another table, a bard strummed a lute, his quiet melody threading through the hum of voices. Each corner of the room told a tale, every face a fragment of the broader journey. After finishing his meal, Edmund felt the pull of conversation. He approached the merchants, drawn by the map's intricate lines and markings. "May I join you?" he asked politely. The eldest of the group, a man with a graying beard and sharp eyes, gestured to an empty chair. "A fellow traveler is always welcome." The map depicted trade routes, some familiar to Edmund and others more mysterious. The merchant spoke of markets in far-off cities, of goods carried across seas and over mountains. Edmund shared his own experiences, the stories of Amberley and the Forest of Shadows sparking interest among the group. "And what of the dangers?" one of the younger merchants asked, leaning forward. "The roads are full of risks these days." Edmund nodded. "The risks are real, but with care and a bit of luck, the rewards often outweigh them." He recounted the encounter with the bandits, drawing a murmur of sympathy and admiration from the group. The elder merchant clapped him on the shoulder. "You've got a steady head on your shoulders, Fletcher. The road favors the brave, but it favors the wise even more." As the evening deepened, the bard's music grew livelier, and the room filled with laughter and the clinking of mugs. The innkeeper himself joined the revelry, regaling the guests with tales of travelers who had passed through his doors. Edmund listened, his heart lightened by the camaraderie. The road could be lonely, but nights like this reminded him of its joys. Before long, a local farmer approached the bard with a request for a folk tune. The bard obliged, his fingers dancing over the lute's strings as a hauntingly beautiful melody filled the air. Conversations hushed as the music wrapped around the room, weaving a moment of shared silence and wonder. Edmund closed his eyes briefly, letting the tune transport him to memories of home. When the fire burned low and the guests began to retire, Edmund made his way to his room. The small chamber was simple but cozy, with a sturdy bed and a window that framed the starlit sky. He sat by the window for a moment, the cool night air brushing against his face. From below, the faint sound of the bard's lute lingered, a soothing melody that carried him to sleep. The morning would bring another day on the road, but for now, Edmund was content. The inn had offered more than rest. It had reminded him of the connections that made his journey meaningful. As the stars watched over the quiet inn, Edmund dreamed of the paths yet to come. The river crossing. The morning broke with a misty chill as Edmund prepared to leave the traveler's rest. The inn's quiet charm lingered in his thoughts, but the road called once more, urging him toward York. Rowan's hooves struck the dirt path with a familiar rhythm as they traveled through the rolling hills, the land blanketed by early morning fog that softened the world around them. The dew-laden air carried the faint scent of earth and wildflowers, fresh and invigorating. By mid-morning, the mist began to lift, revealing the gentle curve of a wide river cutting through the landscape. Its waters shimmered under the rising sun, reflecting the golden light in ripples that seemed to dance with life. A small wooden bridge spanned the river, its weathered planks creaking under the weight of occasional travelers. Edmund guided Rowan carefully toward the crossing, his eyes lingering on the peaceful scene. Birds flitted above the water, their songs weaving a melody that harmonized with the babbling of the current. As they approached the bridge, Edmund noticed a group of travelers gathered near its edge. Their carts were laden with goods, and their faces wore a mix of weariness and frustration. A young man waved him down, his brow furrowed with worry. "Sir, might you have a moment?" the man called, his voice tinged with urgency. Edmund halted Rowan and stepped closer. "What seems to be the trouble?" he asked, his tone calm and measured. The man gestured toward the bridge. "The crossing has been deemed unsafe. The river swelled after last week's rains, and the supports are weakened. We've been waiting for the ferryman, but he's nowhere to be found." Edmund surveyed the situation. The bridge did indeed look precarious, its wooden beams warped and cracked in places. He glanced at the other travelers, an elderly couple with a small cart of produce, a woman holding a child close to her chest, and a merchant with a worried expression as he inspected his wares. Each face told a story of a journey interrupted, of plans delayed. "Perhaps we could work together," Edmund suggested. "The river isn't too wide here. If we gather enough sturdy branches and rope, we might fashion a raft to ferry the carts across." The merchant frowned. That's a bold idea, stranger. But do we have the time or the skill? It's better than waiting indefinitely, Edmund replied. And with all of us working together, I believe we can manage. His steady confidence seemed to sway the group. The travelers began to gather fallen branches from the nearby woods, tying them together with ropes and strips of cloth. Edmund led the effort, his practical knowledge of trade routes and problem-solving proving invaluable. The elderly couple worked with quiet determination, while the young man and the merchant lashed the branches tightly together. Even the woman with the child lent a hand, her little one watching wide-eyed as the raft took shape. By midday, their makeshift vessel was ready. It was crude but sturdy, a testament to their collective effort. Edmund tested it first, wading into the shallows and guiding the raft onto the water. It floated with surprising stability, its surface bobbing gently as the current pushed against it. "It will hold," he said, nodding to the others. "We'll cross one cart at a time. Steady hands and patience will see us through." The crossing was slow and methodical. Each cart was loaded onto the raft and ferried across with care, the travelers waiting alongside to keep it balanced. Rowan proved to be a calming presence, her steady demeanor reassuring the nervous animals among the group. Edmund's calm instructions guided them, his voice a steady anchor amid the swirling current. When the final cart reached the far bank, a cheer rose from the group. The travelers shared smiles and handshakes, their earlier frustration replaced with relief and gratitude. The elderly couple approached Edmund, their weathered faces alight with appreciation. "You've done a great thing today, sir," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. "We would have been stranded without your help." Edmund smiled, brushing off the praise. "We worked together. That's what made it possible." The young man who had first called out to him stepped forward, offering a small pouch of coins. "Please take this. It's not much, but it's a token of our thanks." Edmund shook his head. "Keep it. Use it for your journey ahead. Safe travels to you all." As the group dispersed, Edmund lingered by the river for a moment, watching the sunlight dance on the water. The makeshift raft, now tethered to a tree, bobbed gently in the current, a quiet reminder of their shared effort. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from the praise, but from knowing he had played a part in easing their burdens. The road awaited, stretching onward through the countryside. Edmund climbed back onto the cart, guiding Rowan forward with a gentle touch. The river crossing had been an unexpected challenge, but it had also been a reminder of the strength found in unity. As the day wore on, the land around him opened up into wide meadows, the air filled with the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves. The journey continued, each step carrying him closer to York and the stories still waiting to unfold. The Forgotten Chapel. As the sun began its descent, painting the horizon with strokes of amber and violet, Edmund found himself on a quiet, overgrown path. The countryside around him was hushed, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a bird returning to its nest. Rowan's steady pace slowed as they approached a crumbling stone wall partially hidden by wild ivy. Beyond it stood the silhouette of a long-abandoned chapel, its weathered spire reaching skyward like a lone sentinel against the encroaching dusk. The sight gave Edmund pause. He had heard tales of forgotten chapels scattered across England, places once vibrant with life and faith, now left to time and nature. He guided Rowan closer, curiosity outweighing the call of the road. The air grew cooler as they entered the chapel grounds, the faint scent of moss and damp stone mingling with the soft sweetness of wildflowers that had reclaimed the space. The chapel's wooden door hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. Edmund hesitated before stepping inside, his boots crunching against the remnants of a stone pathway. The interior was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun streaming through fractured stained glass windows. Dust motes danced in the beams, and the faint echoes of his steps seemed to awaken a forgotten stillness. The space was small but serene. Rows of pews, long warped and splintered, stood as silent witnesses to an age gone by. At the far end, an altar of simple stone was adorned with traces of ivy, as if nature herself had sought to preserve its sanctity. Edmund's gaze lingered on the worn carvings along the altar's edge, symbols of faith and hope, their meanings half forgotten, yet still resonant. He let out a quiet breath, his voice lost in the stillness. There was a weight here, but not one of sorrow. It was the weight of time, of stories untold and prayers whispered long ago. Edmund knelt near the altar, not out of obligation, but out of reverence. He closed his eyes briefly, offering a silent thanks for the road that had brought him here, for the moments of peace found in unexpected places. As he rose, a soft sound drew his attention. From the shadows emerged an elderly man, his frame stooped, but his eyes bright with curiosity. He leaned on a gnarled walking stick, his expression one of gentle surprise. "Forgive me," the man said, his voice warm and measured. "I didn't expect to see another soul here." Edmund offered a respectful nod. "The road led me here. I hope I've not intruded." The man smiled faintly, his gaze drifting to the altar. "This place belongs to no one and everyone. It has stood for centuries, weathering time and change. It's rare to see a traveler pause for such a place. Most pass by without a second glance." "It felt inviting," Edmund replied honestly, as though it had been waiting. The man's smile deepened. "Perhaps it has. Every place holds a spirit of its own, waiting for those who will listen." They spoke for a while, their conversation weaving through topics of the chapel's history and the man's life as a former caretaker. He told Edmund of how the chapel had once been a gathering place for villagers, its walls echoing with hymns and laughter. But as the years passed and the village dwindled, the chapel fell silent, left to the company of the wind and the birds. "Do you stay nearby?" Edmund asked, curious about the man's presence. The elder chuckled softly. "Not nearby, no, but I return now and then to see it still standing, to remember." As darkness deepened, the man bid Edmund farewell, his form disappearing into the shadows as quietly as he had appeared. Edmund lingered a while longer, lighting a small candle he found on the altar. The warm glow flickered against the stone, casting fleeting shapes on the walls. That night, Edmund made camp just outside the chapel. The stars overhead shone brightly, their light unmarred by the smoke of towns or the noise of the world. The chapel stood silhouetted against the night, a reminder of endurance and quiet faith. Edmund's thoughts wandered as he gazed at the stars, the events of the day weaving into his memories like threads in a tapestry. As sleep claimed him, the gentle hush of the chapel seemed to linger, a soothing presence in the vast quiet of the countryside. The road to York still awaited, but for this night, Edmund had found a place of rest that would remain with him long after the journey continued. The Whispering Woods. The morning brought a soft light that filtered through a blanket of clouds, casting a muted glow over the chapel's silhouette. Edmund stirred from his camp, the chill of the night still clinging to the air. Rowan stood nearby, grazing quietly on patches of dew-covered grass. The forgotten chapel behind him seemed to bid farewell in its silent, stoic way as Edmund prepared to move on. The road ahead led into a dense forest known among travelers as the Whispering Woods. Stories of the forest's strange sounds and unexplainable whispers had reached even the furthest corners of England. Some called it a place of mischief, others a sanctuary of ancient spirits. Edmund, ever curious, felt more intrigued than wary. The entrance to the woods was marked by two massive oaks whose intertwined branches formed a natural archway. As Edmund passed beneath, the air seemed to shift, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and damp earth. The dappled sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy, leaving the path ahead cloaked in shadow and mystery. Rowan's pace slowed, her ears flicking at the faint sounds that surrounded them. The forest seemed alive with a symphony of rustling leaves, distant bird calls, and the occasional creak of branches swaying in the breeze. But there was something else, too, a soft murmur, just beyond the edge of hearing, as if the trees themselves were whispering secrets. Edmund paused to listen. The whispers seemed to rise and fall like the ebb and flow of a distant tide. Words were indistinguishable, but the tone was soothing, almost melodic. He smiled to himself, the thought of the forest speaking adding a layer of wonder to his journey. The path wound deeper into the woods, its uneven surface softened by a thick layer of moss. Wildflowers in hues of violet and white dotted the undergrowth, their delicate blooms swaying gently. Edmund's cart moved with a steady rhythm, the sound of its wheels muffled by the forest's hush. He felt as though he had entered another world, one untouched by the passage of time. As midday approached, the forest opened into a small clearing. In its center stood an ancient stone well, its edges worn smooth by centuries of use. The area seemed oddly bright, with sunlight spilling through a gap in the canopy above. Edmund halted Rowan and approached the well, curiosity drawing him closer. Carved into the stones around the well were intricate patterns, swirling lines and symbols that seemed to tell a story, though their meaning was lost to time. A faint shimmer caught Edmund's eye as he peered into the well's depths. The water below was impossibly clear, reflecting the light like a mirror. He lowered his flask, drawing up the cool liquid and tasting it. It was fresh and crisp, carrying a faint sweetness that seemed to invigorate him. As he stood, a rustling sound came from the edge of the clearing. Edmund turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a young woman, her cloak the color of autumn leaves, blending seamlessly with the forest around her. She carried a small basket filled with herbs and wildflowers, her expression one of cautious curiosity. "Good day, traveler," she said, her voice light and musical. "You've stumbled upon an old place, one that many overlook." Edmund inclined his head in greeting. "Good day. It's a beautiful spot, though it feels as though it holds more than just beauty." The woman's lips curved into a faint smile. "You're perceptive. This well has stood here longer than anyone remembers. They say its water holds the spirit of the woods. To drink from it is to carry a piece of the forest with you." "And do you believe that?" Edmund asked, intrigued. She shrugged lightly, her gaze drifting to the well. "I believe the forest has a life of its own, and this well is part of it. Perhaps that's enough." They spoke for a while, exchanging stories of the road and the woods. The woman, who introduced herself as Karis, explained that she gathered herbs for remedies and often roamed the forest paths. "The woods have always been kind to me," she said. "They guide those who walk with respect." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the clearing, Karis bid Edmund farewell. "May the forest guide you safely," she said before disappearing into the trees, her basket swinging gently at her side. Edmund lingered a moment longer, his gaze returning. He felt a renewed sense of calm, as though the whispers of the woods had settled within him. With Rowan's reins in hand, he resumed his journey, the path winding deeper into the forest. As twilight fell, the forest grew quieter, the murmurs softening into a gentle hum. Edmund found a sheltered spot beneath a great oak, its roots forming a natural hollow. He set up camp, the fire's glow casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. The whispers seemed to return, mingling with the crackle of the flames, lulling him into a peaceful state. That night, Edmund dreamed of the forest. In his dreams, the trees moved like dancers, their branches weaving patterns against a starry sky. The whispers became voices, speaking not in words but in feelings, of connection, of balance, of the quiet strength that comes from enduring. When he awoke, the first light of dawn was breaking, painting the woods in soft gold. The whispering woods had left their mark on Edmund, not as a place of mystery, but as a sanctuary. As he prepared to continue his journey, he felt a deeper connection to the road and the world around him. The forest seemed to watch him as he departed, its whispers fading into the morning breeze, carrying him forward to the next chapter of his travels. The village of Heartfelt. The first light of dawn spilled gently over the horizon as Edmund emerged from the depths of the whispering woods. The forest's cool embrace gave way to open fields kissed by the warmth of the sun. Rowan's hooves fell lightly on the soft earth, her steady pace carrying them closer to the outline of a village nestled in the distance. Heartfelt, a place spoken of fondly by travelers for its hospitality, its markets, and the warmth of its people. As they approached, the air grew alive with the hum of daily life. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the faint clatter of tools mingled with the distant laughter of children. Hearthwood lay cradled in a valley, its thatched cottages and cobbled streets exuding an inviting charm. The village green was dotted with market stalls, their bright awnings fluttering in the breeze. Edmund guided Rowan toward the edge of the marketplace, where a wide oak tree offered shade. Merchants bustled about, setting up their wares, baskets of fresh produce, bolts of fabric, and handmade trinkets that gleamed in the morning light. The scent of fresh bread mingled with the earthy aroma of herbs and spices, filling the air with a sense of abundance. "Welcome to Hearthwood, stranger," a cheerful voice called. Edmund turned to see a broad-shouldered man wiping his hands on an apron. "You've come just in time for the market's busiest day." "Good day to you," Edmund replied, dismounting from the cart. "I've heard much of Hearthwood's hospitality. It seems the tales are true." The man grinned. "Name's Osric. If you need bread, find me at that stall there." He pointed to a stall laden with loaves golden from the oven. "And if you're looking for more than bread, well, this market has it all." Edmund nodded in thanks before turning his attention to his own preparations. He unloaded bolts of cloth and small casks of spices, arranging them neatly on the cart's surface. His fabrics caught the morning sun, their rich colors drawing the attention of passers-by. "Is this silk?" an elderly woman asked, her fingers brushing lightly over a shimmering bolt. "Indeed it is," Edmund said, his voice warm. "Brought from across the seas, where it's woven with care and skill, it would make a fine shawl or gown." The woman's eyes lit up. "I'll take a length," she decided, her smile soft with satisfaction. As the morning wore on, more villagers came to his stall. A blacksmith's apprentice bartered for a pouch of cinnamon, and a young couple chose fabric for their upcoming wedding. Edmund's goods seemed to weave their way into the stories of Hearthwood, connecting him to the lives of its people. Near midday, the market square filled with music. A group of minstrels arrived, their lutes and pipes bringing a lively melody that danced through the air. Children clapped and spun in playful circles, their laughter blending with the music. Edmund leaned against his cart, watching the scene unfold with a quiet smile. The rhythm of the market, its bustling energy and simple joys, was a reminder of the heart of his trade, not just goods exchanged, but moments shared. As the sun reached its peak, Edmund found himself drawn to the edge of the green, where a woman tended a small stall of handmade candles. The candles glowed softly in the sunlight, their delicate scents of lavender, beeswax, and herbs creating a soothing atmosphere. "They're lovely," Edmund said, picking up one adorned with dried flowers. The woman looked up, her face framed by wisps of auburn hair. "Thank you. Each one is made with care, using what the land provides." "Your craft is admirable," Edmund replied, "and your scents remind me of peaceful evenings on the road." She smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "A traveler, then? The road must bring its own kind of peace." "It does," Edmund agreed, "but so do places like this." The conversation flowed easily, and as he left her stall, he carried with him a small candle wrapped carefully in cloth. It seemed a fitting keepsake of Hearthwood, a token of the village's warmth. By late afternoon, the market began to wind down. Stalls emptied, their keepers packing up goods while exchanging farewells and promises to meet again. Edmund loaded his cart, the weight lighter now, but his heart fuller. He had sold well, but more than that, he had felt the embrace of a community, however briefly. As the village settled into the quiet rhythm of evening, Osric approached with a loaf of bread and a flagon of cider. "For the road," he said with a grin. "Hearthwood doesn't let its visitors leave hungry." Edmund accepted the gift gratefully. "Your generosity will be remembered." That night, he camped on the outskirts of the village beneath a wide oak tree. The distant glow of Hearthwood's hearths flickered like stars against the darkened valley. As he ate the bread and sipped the cider, he felt the quiet contentment of a day well spent. The journey ahead still called, but for this moment he was grounded in the simple, enduring spirit of Hearthwood. Sleep came easily. the scents of lavender and beeswax from the candle lulling him into dreams of golden fields and warm welcomes. When dawn broke, Edmund rose with a renewed sense of purpose, his path clear and his heart light. The village of Hearthwood had left its mark, a memory to carry forward as he continued toward York and the stories yet to come. The storm on the moor. Edmund left Hearthwood as the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, their golden glow promising a fair day ahead. Rowan's steady gait and the creak of the cart accompanied him along a winding road that climbed gently into the hills. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy aroma of dew-soaked grass and wild heather. The terrain gradually shifted from lush greenery to the rugged expanse of the moors, where the land rolled in waves of purple and green under an endless sky. The moors were beautiful in their starkness, a place where silence reigned, broken only by the occasional cry of a distant bird. Edmund felt a deep calm settle over him as he guided Rowan along the narrow path that cut through the landscape. Here the world felt vast and untouched, and the weight of his journey seemed lighter. But as midday approached, the horizon darkened. Heavy clouds gathered, their edges tinged with an ominous gray. The wind picked up, its sharp bite carrying the faint scent of rain. Edmund's pace quickened. He knew the dangers of being caught in a storm on the moors. The open expanse offered little shelter, and the weather could turn treacherous in an instant. The first drops fell as a gentle drizzle pattering softly against the cart's wooden frame. But within moments, the rain intensified, sheets of water driving against him with relentless force. The wind howled, tearing through the heather and tugging at Edmund's cloak. Rowan brayed uneasily, her steps faltering as the path turned slick with mud. Edmund scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing against the rain. Ahead, barely visible through the storm's fury, stood the silhouette of a stone structure. It appeared to be an old shepherd's hut, weathered and leaning, but still standing against the elements. He urged Rowan forward, the promise of shelter giving him a renewed sense of purpose. By the time they reached the hut, both man and mule were drenched, their breath visible in the cold, damp air. Edmund pushed the heavy wooden door open, its rusted hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the space was small and sparse, with a rough stone floor and a crumbling hearth. But it was dry, and that was enough. He unhitched Rowan, leading her to a corner where she could rest. The cart was pulled just inside the doorway, its contents thankfully protected by a sturdy canvas cover. Edmund set to work, gathering what little dry wood he could find near the hearth. With flint and steel, he coaxed a reluctant flame to life, its warmth spreading through the dim room. As the fire crackled, Edmund removed his soaked cloak and hung it near the hearth to dry. He rummaged through his supplies, pulling out a loaf of bread and a small flask of cider, a gift from Osric back in Hearthwood. He ate slowly, savoring the simple meal as the storm raged outside, its roar muffled by the thick stone walls. The hours passed, the storm showing no signs of abating. Edmund's thoughts drifted to his family back in London, to Matilda's warm smile and the laughter of his children. He wondered if they had heard the thunder rolling across the countryside, if they too were watching the rain from their windows. The memory brought a pang of longing, but also a sense of purpose. Each mile on this journey brought him closer to providing for them, to fulfilling his role as a father and husband. As evening fell, the storm finally began to wane. The rain slowed to a steady drizzle, and the wind quieted to a low moan. Edmund added another log to the fire, its glow casting flickering shadows on the walls. He felt the weight of the day settle over him, his muscles aching from the struggle against the storm. Just as he was about to drift into sleep, a soft knock startled him. He rose quickly, his hand instinctively reaching for the small knife at his belt. The knock came again, followed by a voice, faint but clear. "Is someone inside?" "I mean no harm." Edmund opened the door cautiously, revealing a figure cloaked in wet wool. The man's face was pale, his eyes wide with relief. "I was caught in the storm," he explained. "The moors are no place to be in such weather. May I share your fire?" Edmund stepped aside, nodding. "Of course, come in." The man entered, shaking off his cloak near the door. He introduced himself as Elias, a traveler heading south to visit his sister. Grateful for the shelter, he settled near the hearth, his hands outstretched to the warmth. Edmund shared what was left of his bread and cider, and the two fell into easy conversation. Elias spoke of his travels, of bustling cities and quiet hamlets, of the people he had met and the stories they carried. In return, Edmund shared tales of his trade, of the markets and the roads that bound England together. The storm outside became a distant presence as their words filled the small hut, weaving a connection between two strangers brought together by chance. When the fire burned low, they finally succumbed to sleep, the rhythmic patter of rain a lullaby against the stone walls. By dawn the storm had passed, leaving the moors glistening under a clear sky. The air was fresh and still, carrying the promise of a new day. Edmund and Elias parted ways with a handshake and a wish for safe travels. As he guided Rowan back onto the path, Edmund felt a renewed sense of resilience. The storm had tested him, but it had also reminded him of the strength found in enduring and in the kindness of those met along the way. The arrival in York. The first rays of dawn stretched across the moors, painting them in hues of gold and lavender, as Edmund guided Rowan back onto the well-worn path. The air carried a freshness that spoke of renewal, as if the storm had cleansed not only the land, but also the lingering weariness in his heart. Ahead lay the final stretch of his journey, the ancient city of York, a destination that had loomed large in his mind for weeks. The road sloped gently downward, flanked by rolling hills dotted with clusters of wildflowers and the occasional grazing sheep. The faint hum of life grew stronger with each passing mile, the quiet solitude of the countryside giving way to the promise of bustling streets and vibrant markets. By midday, the spires of York Minster rose into view, their grandeur silhouetted against the clear blue sky. Edmund paused at the crest of a hill, taking in the sight before him. The city stretched out in a patchwork of stone walls, red-tiled roofs, and winding streets. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the faint toll of bells reached his ears, mingling with the distant murmur of voices. A sense of accomplishment swelled within him. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but he had made it. As he approached the city gates, the bustling energy of York enveloped him. Merchants and travelers crowded the entrance, their carts laden with goods and their voices rising in a cacophony of greetings, negotiations, and laughter. The guards nodded curtly as Edmund passed, their eyes scanning the throng with practiced vigilance. The streets of York were alive with activity. Children darted between stalls, their laughter ringing out like bells. Bakers and butchers called out to passers-by, their wares displayed in colorful abundance. The air was rich with the scent of fresh bread, roasted meats, and the faint tang of spices. Edmund guided Rowan carefully through the crowd, his cart drawing curious glances as the bright colors of his fabrics caught the sunlight. He made his way to the central market square, a bustling hub surrounded by timber-framed buildings and overlooked by the towering spires of the minster. Finding an open space near the edge of the square, Edmund set about arranging his wares. Silk and wool, spices and herbs, each item carefully displayed to catch the eye of passing customers. It wasn't long before the first patrons arrived. A young woman with a toddler on her hip marveled at the vibrant hues of his fabrics, selecting a bolt of soft blue wool for a winter cloak. An elderly merchant bartered for a pouch of cinnamon, reminiscing about his own travels to distant lands. Each transaction brought a small measure of joy, not just in profit but in connection, the exchange of stories and smiles as valuable as the goods themselves. By afternoon, Edmund's stall had become a modest success. Word of his rare spices and fine fabrics spread quickly, drawing a steady stream of customers. Among them was a well-dressed gentleman who lingered over a bolt of shimmering silk. "This is remarkable," the man said, his tone admiring. "Where did you come by such quality?" "It's from the East," Edmund replied, his voice steady but warm. "Traded through many hands before reaching mine. A piece of the world brought here to York." The man smiled, nodding as he made his purchase. Your journey has done you credit, sir. Such treasures are rare indeed. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the square, Edmund found a moment to pause. He leaned against his cart, watching the ebb and flow of the market around him. The minster's bells rang out the hour, their deep tones resonating through the city. In that moment, he felt the weight of the journey lift, replaced by a quiet sense of fulfillment. Later, as the market wound down and the crowd thinned, Edmund packed away his remaining wares. The day had been a success, and he allowed himself a rare indulgence, a hot meal at a nearby inn, its warm glow spilling onto the cobbled street. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and spiced cider, the chatter of patrons creating a comforting backdrop. As he sat by the fire, a tankard of cider in hand, Edmund reflected on the road that had brought him here. Each step, each challenge, had been a thread in the tapestry of his journey. From the bustling streets of London to the quiet majesty of the whispering woods, from the storm-lashed moors to the welcoming arms of Hearthwood, every moment had shaped this arrival. York was not the end of his story, he realized, but another chapter, a place to rest, to trade, and to gather new stories before the road called him once more. For now, though, he was content to sit in the warmth of the inn, the journey's weight eased by the knowledge that he had carried it well. The fire crackled softly, its light dancing on the walls as Edmund's thoughts drifted. The road would always beckon, but tonight, in the heart of York, he felt at peace. And that, he knew, was enough. Thank you for joining us on the Merchant's Journey. If this story carried you away into a world of peace and wonder, consider giving it a thumbs up. And if it brought you comfort or inspiration, feel free to share it with friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe for daily relaxing tales that bring warmth and calm to your evenings. Wishing you a peaceful night and sweet dreams.